There is no place in Canada where wife battering is not a problem. Thompson, Manitoba, 800 kilometers north of Winnipeg, is no exception. It is estimated that 1 out of every 6 Canadian men beats the woman he lives with. North or south, rich or poor, in town or country, the problem is the same. In the North, resources for the victims of family violence are few and far between, and many women have no access to such services even when they are available. Battered women in this community are luckier than some. Here, unlike most of Canada's rural and northern areas, there is a transition house. It serves not only Thompson residents, but women and their children who come from up to 500 miles away.
Well, I come from a reserve called Split Lake, and well, my husband beat me up, and then I went to see the nurses in Split Lake, and I told them that I didn't want to go back home. One morning, these counselors came and got me at my dad's place. They told me that they wanted to see me at the band office. So I went, and there was my husband sitting there. So those counselors talked to us. They told us like what we were doing was wrong, you know, that we should live together, that we made vows to God and church, and that if we wanted our house back, we should go back with each other. I told them that my husband, you know, uses our money to buy drugs or booze. But they said that a woman has to be strong, you know, to put up with it, you know. I disagreed on that, but they just laughed at me. Then, so as soon as I got the money, and then I jumped on a taxi with my kids, and then my brother was staying here at the time, so I went to his apartment. I had to sell my boots, you know, just to get money for taxi to come here, and it was hard. Like I feel more wiser, you know, I feel more safer, and I feel strong, and I could make it on my own.
Yeah, he's there.
Hi, Debbie.
Hi, how are you today?
Not too bad.
Could I have 3 chickens, please?
Sure.
Oh, hi, Debbie. Shopping?
Yeah.
Is it pretty busy at the shelter right now?
It's been a busy week.
Oh, so you have
Unity Johnson and Debbie Tom run Thompson's 24-hour crisis phone and emergency shelter. The shelter takes women and their children for up to 2 weeks, providing free accommodation, counseling, and referrals.
Hi, Lee, how are you today?
Oh, hi. Did you just get on?
Lily's 3rd child was born a week ago, months after she left the reserve and a violent husband. She has now moved out of the shelter into a transition apartment in the same building, where she can live with her children independently and safely.
Do you like her?
Yeah.
Okay.
You
That's
George?
nice. I'm not George, no. I'm Unity, remember? You're right. The town reacted to the crisis center, I think, first of all, in a negative manner. I think it has gone on to build from there. I hate to use the word credibility, but I think that has happened over the years with the crisis center. 10 years ago, there was nothing about how to deal with abuse or battered women in the social workers' theory book. They never dealt with it. When a woman went to see them, they were treated as mentally ill. I remember just a couple of years ago, locally, one of the workers was saying, well, we don't see very many battered women. The women come in with psychiatric problems. That's because they were not recognizing that these women were being abused, and the reason for them coming to see a social worker was the fact that they were being abused. But the shelter has been used so tremendously since it's opened in 1982. that there is no question that it's necessary. And maybe the people who were skeptical at first are now giving tremendous support to the shelter because it's being used so frequently.
And this is heavy.
The transition apartments were set up by the Crisis Center to provide additional accommodation for up to 6 months. Most women leaving the shelter have to go on welfare, and apartments are scarce in the north. These are always in demand. For Lily, it means a breathing space and the chance to find her feet in a new community without relinquishing the support of the other women in the shelter who are facing similar challenges.
Wait.
The awareness created has to continue from here in terms of the liaison we form with the various community agencies, which has been happening very much so within the last couple of years. And there's several other areas.
One of the aims of the Crisis Center is to increase awareness in the community to the needs of battered women. The local RCMP is often the first place a woman calls for help.
Are very, very outdated in terms of dealing with women.
It seems to me that what we could be doing is developing some sort of strategy and a plan so that we can work together to provide protection for the wife.
I think we're doing that right now by coming to you and presenting some of the facts in terms of how the woman feels. It is a step towards trying to help you understand the types of things that we deal with, the types of support we can offer to help make your job much easier when you go out on a call. That we have volunteers, we have a 24-hour crisis line, so whenever the men go out on a call, that they can use us as a resource or a support system for the women in those situations.
Creating a network of resource people throughout the North is a long-term goal, but training is scarce. The Crisis Center's contribution is the Northern Conference on Family Violence, where participants from scattered communities have the chance to learn from the experience of other centers.
Changing cultural norms, not just individuals.
We also have to look at some of the historical perspectives. Historically, women have been looked upon in most societies as property, as chattel. They've been looked upon as second-class citizens. Now, in the States, it's only been 100 years since the last law has been removed from the books stating how a man could chastise his wife. And that law stated that a man could beat his wife with a stick as long as that stick was no greater than the width of his thumb. Though those laws have been repealed, the situation hasn't changed. Interfamilial violence, the assault of wives, is looked upon very, very differently than stranger-to-stranger assaults. So our culture, in many ways, is saying it's okay to physically assault your wife or your female partner.
Yes, Debbie, you've probably heard in society the talk around that, you know, the family is the all-important unit in society, and any erosion of the family unit is something that in fact attacks the stability of society. How would you view the role of the Crisis Center, which you're part of, in this overall structure and achieving this result of stability?
We basically are there for the woman to help her make her choices. If she chooses to be in the same family unit with the battering still occurring, we try to give her the resources that are available to her.
We do not encourage the women to leave their homes, but at the same time we do not encourage them to go back to the most dangerous
so you
place.
remain neutral on the issue?
As neutral as possible, but there is a time when we may find that we have to tell the woman, you know, it's your decision, but I think that's a dangerous place for you to be.
What do we do about officers that are not laying charges? I've had instances where women have been in the hospital where charges have not been laid.
Maybe the wife that was battered will not want to tell us what happened, and there's no independent witnesses. We don't have enough evidence to support a charge, and we may not be able to lay the charge in that case.
Those decisions are very difficult to make. I think that, again, as the body of knowledge grows in this particular area, that training is what is needed. And I don't think that training, it's effective to train just the constables in a police force. I think what you have to do is train supervisors, you have to train upper management so that the philosophies that are adopted by upper management flow down and there's direction given to the members that are actually out on the street.
I have to say, governments do not fund social programs. They fund make-work projects. In most situations where women are working in shelters or crisis centers, it's for very low pay. Most of the time, minimum wage. Sometimes we have a large turnover in staff. We have to continually train people. Depending on the type of funding you get from the government, the next batch of money they give you, you can't hire those same people on that batch of money because they give it to you under a specific type of funding contract. Therefore, we are having a lot of problems. So no, the funding is not adequate. Thank you.
I wouldn't go back to that, the way life was for me before. I would never go back to that kind of life. No way will I ever be treated, like shit, And my kids to see me get beaten up and, then to grow up. Like for instance, my girl used to see my husband beat me up, and I don't want her to grow up thinking that, it's okay for a woman to get beaten up. I don't want them to see that no more. My little boy is going to grow up as a man. If he grows up to see his dad beating me up, and then he's gonna beat his wife up too.
There are battered women in every community, and in every rural community in this province and in this country. And therefore it just follows that there's a need for sheltering, emergency sheltering and transition kinds of shelter in every community, or at least accessible to every community. Sometimes the only available shelters are so-called safe houses, private homes that take in a woman for a day or two. In a crisis, they might mean the difference between life and death, but they are not a long-term solution.
I know that you can be isolated in the city, but it's usually a psychological type of isolation. Isolation in rural areas can be very real because of the tendency of men who are abusive to try and isolate their partners. Women are often on farmyards, that are distances away from a service. They often don't have access to the kind of resources that may be available in a city.
In a small settlement or a reserve, there may be no safe place, not even a safe house, for a woman to go to. There aren't public buses. It's not a matter of walking a couple of blocks and paying up to $1. Taxis are either non-existent or cost a lot of money. It might cost $80 or $100 to take a cab 60 or 70 miles to get to a community that might have some services to offer. Rural women in Manitoba are more economically dependent upon their husbands than are women in cities. In small rural communities, there's very little in the way of paid out-of-the-home employment for women. And farm women often don't see any cash value for their labor at all. Very likely, even if she can connect with a bus or a taxi, she doesn't have any money to pay for it.
When I was asked first to open my home as a safe home for battered women. My first reaction was yes, of course. And one, because I knew there was a felt need in the community for that, and secondly, because way back in my past I had been a battered woman myself and knew the trauma of not having anywhere to go when such a thing happened. I remember 35 years ago when, as a battered wife, I was forced to leave my house in the middle of the night. Christmas Eve is supposed to be a happy time, and it always had been in my family. My husband came home very drunk. It was late at night, and started beating me. And I was partly undressed, so I just had my skirt on and my bra. And I had to run out of the house for my life. And I ran next door and knocked on the door. And a woman came to the door and looked at me and said, "Oh, you're uncovered, you're undressed." And so I said, "Yes, but my husband is threatening my life and is beating me. Please let me come in." And she said, "No, not like that. My husband's in the house." And she went in and got a coat while I stood out in 20 below weather, shivering and waiting till she got a coat to cover me and bring me in. And I felt the rejection and the humiliation of it all. 2 weeks later, when I had decided that this was the end, I was not going to go back into that situation, I applied to have a legal separation, and I went to this woman and asked her if she and her husband would be witnesses at my case, and she said, "Oh no, we're not going to be involved in that."
The Portage Women's Shelter program consists of, I guess, 4 really important areas.
Are you alone in the house now?
The backbone of the program is a 24-hour crisis line, which is backed up by a safe home program. These are emergency accommodations that are in our community, families that volunteer their homes on a very low per diem basis to house women and children who happen to be in crisis at that time. Our best safe home operators at this point have been people who have a really personal interest in the issue of wife abuse, in that their families may have experienced violence in the past, or they may have come through a situation at one time themselves. We maintain very close contact with our shelter operators. It's, I feel, really critical that that happen because they're working in isolation. You can't publicly give them a claim for what they're doing. It's really important that you can build their support systems in some other ways. And when we will make a placement, we will spend some time with them. We will talk to them when a woman leaves to find out how things are going. Just generally, we try and show an interest in what's happening in their lives as well.
I was really impressed with the way the shelter people brought this lady to me, because they didn't just drop her off on the doorstep. They brought her in. She came with 2 little children, a little boy and a little girl, and they brought her in and sat and chatted until she felt comfortable, and then they left, reminding her that they were there if she needed anything, and that they'd come and pick her up in the morning. And so then the children, it was bedtime, and so we put them in the bathtub and bathed them, put them to bed, and we talked for a little while and had a cup of tea, and it brought back an awful lot of painful memories that I thought were buried, that I had completely forgotten. I hadn't thought about those things for years, and so as a result, when I got to bed, I didn't sleep for a while. And I hadn't realized that the pain was still there, and the fear that comes up with it, and so on.
Safe homes may be able to provide temporary kinds of sheltering for women who are in immediate crisis. And when I say temporary, I'm referring to a period of time of, say, 2 days, a couple of nights, 3 days, maybe up to 5 days. But in almost no case, any period of time longer than that. And those 2 days or those 3 days are simply not enough time to enable a woman to decide what track she's going to take next.
At its best, a safe home is just a stepping stone, a stopover on the way to a real transition house. A battered woman needs not only safety, but time and contact with other women, and a chance to break the silence she has lived with so long. In many communities across Canada, not even safe houses are available. This was true for West Bay Reserve on Manitoulin Island, Ontario. The nearest shelter was in Sudbury, 200 kilometers away. Today, West Bay has a unique program for housing single mothers and women in crisis.
They would go to their parents nearby, they'd go to friends, to neighbors, but eventually I think in the past, they mostly went back to their same situation. And I think we've got a viable alternative. I think the men are very aware of it as a place for women to go, and I think that's very good. We have tried to instill in the women a feeling that they're safe there, and that if their husbands are going to bother them, then we have no qualms about calling in the police, telling them to stay away from these women. When we first put a woman in there who was being battered at home, was one of our band counselors said that we were breaking up homes and we had no right offering this woman a shelter, to get her away from her husband and break up the family. But that was in the early days, and I think those days are past. You don't hear things like that anymore around the reserve. And I think the people in West Bay generally have accepted it as a woman's building, as a woman's place to go to. It was a program initiated and carried through by the women here. So we just felt that it should be women who also got the jobs and did the work. The women that were working on the Homemakers building, they got training at the same time. They got carpentry training, and they used it to fix up their own homes. They used it to get jobs. It was also kind of fun and exciting and something different. Traditionally, anytime jobs were available on the reserve, they were geared towards men, the breadwinners of the family, forgetting that single women are also breadwinners in the family. We had a lot of comments like, oh, the building's going to be crooked and the foundation's going to fall and the windows are going to fall out, and we had and people kind of joked about it. They didn't take us seriously, especially when they heard we were going to be hiring women carpenters to put up the building. But I think as the building started to go up and it started looking nice, the people, the men who had been joking before, start giving us valid compliments about the place, saying how nice it looked and what a good job we were doing. And they came around to seeing that we were doing all right. It's been accepted because it kind of came from the inside of the reserve, eh? And I think if the government had come in and said, we're going to put this up for you people, I don't think no one would have wanted to donate anything or really be a part of it. They would have accepted it, and it would have sat somewhere. But I don't think we would have had that good community feeling that it's ours, that it belongs here in West Bay. Another need we saw here was that the children were not learning to speak their own language. And at that time, there was no one to do it. So the parents got organized and they started the Nungusak immersion program. And we offered the services of the building. They're right at the end of the building, the last apartment. It's been renovated and it kind of keeps the noise away from the other tenants. And it gives them some privacy at the end. They have a place to play and it's a home for their program.
Children everywhere are affected by family violence and often grow up to repeat the cycle. The Women's Building in West Bay, with its children's program and crisis shelter, is an attempt to change that pattern, and it makes a bold statement that women, and the community as a whole, will not tolerate wife abuse.
It's giving them, I guess, some kind of dignity where they don't feel that they are less than, the other people that live here. And it's been helpful to the children. And the single parents have felt important because people in the community took notice of them and did something for them and helped them.
When I needed someone, there was no one nearby to go to, and even the police whom I called in were not sympathetic. They felt that a woman who was beaten up by her husband must have done something to aggravate him.
Right. Where I would prefer to be would be in a reserve. Back in the, where I have a lot of, my friends are there and my family, And it'll be much easier for my kids too. Where they could learn to speak their language and, like, for instance, my girl hardly knows, that many Cree words, just the easy ones. And I don't know, I like to be at home.